Imagine this for a second. You're in probably the worst moment of your life dealing with grief, just completely raw. And you place your trust, like your absolute trust, in professionals to care for someone you love dearly.
Yeah, it's a uniquely vulnerable time.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you find out the trust wasn't just, misplaced. It was savagely betrayed.
Yeah.
That the comfort you were promised was actually this calculated, horrifying lie.
It really is stomach churning.
That's what we're diving into today, a really grim story about a funeral home scandal. It didn't just shake up a small Colorado town. It sort of ripped the lid off this disturbing pattern of deceit in an industry that's supposed to be about peace and dignity.
An industry built entirely on trust, really.
Exactly. We're going to unpack how almost 190 bodies were found, decaying in just unspeakable conditions, and how for nearly 200 families, their grief was just compounded by this betrayal that's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And what's so unsettling, I think, is how it highlights that vulnerability we were just talking about. When you're grieving, logical thinking often takes a back seat to emotion, right? It just creates this perfect storm for exploitation.
Yeah.
This wasn't just like poor service. It was a deliberate, long-running deception targeting people when they were completely defenseless.
That's it precisely. And the different layers to this are just astonishing. So our journey starts in Penrose, Colorado. It's a small place, kind of unassuming, about a 2-hour drive south of Denver.
Right.
And this town was home to the Return to Nature funeral home. Now, this place marketed itself as an eco-conscious choice, offering green burials, dignified, environmentally friendly.
Yeah, on the surface, it sounded really thoughtful, caring even. They definitely cultivated that image.
But then
Yeah.
the horror really started to come out in October 2023.
That's when it all began to surface, yeah. Neighbors in Penrose started reporting this just foul, unmistakable smell coming from the building. And when the authorities, the investigators, finally went inside, well, any idea of dignity was just shattered. Between 2019 and 2023, nearly 190 human bodies had just been left there to decay.
Oh, my God.
And not just neglected, they were found stacked on top of each other. Some were put in these homemade cooling units that clearly weren't working properly. Yeah. The floors were soaked in decomposition fluid. The whole building just decrepit, infested with flies, maggots. It's hard to even describe.
Unimaginable. A place meant for final goodbyes.
Turned into a site of pure horror. It was active desecration, really.
The thought is just sickening.
Right.
But as investigators dug deeper, they found the rot wasn't just physical. It went into the finances, too. Another layer of calculated deceit.
Right.
It wasn't only about the bodies, as horrific as that is. Jon Hallford, the owner, he also managed to defraud the federal government. We're talking nearly $900,000 in COVID-19 aid.
Yeah, almost $1 million. Money that was meant to help businesses and people during a global crisis.
And he just diverted it.
That's where the financial side gets really brazen. We look through the court documents, and it's clear this aid money, probably things like PPP loans, meant to keep businesses running during the pandemic, it wasn't used for the funeral home.
So where did it go?
Well, Jon Hallford spent it lavishly on luxury items. We're talking expensive cars, a GMC Yukon, and Infinity, together worth over $120,000.
Wow.
He dropped $31,000 on cryptocurrency, bought stuff from Gucci, Tiffany & Co., even paid for laser body sculpting.
Laser body sculpting with COVID relief funds.
Yeah.
While bodies were decaying in his facility.
It's grotesque. And while this level of misuse is shocking given the context, it sadly does fit a pattern we sometimes see in funeral home fraud. Funds meant for services, for care, just siphoned off for a personal gain. It's exploiting a system meant to help within an industry built on that sacred trust.
It's just... The level of depravity is astounding. To think of people so vulnerable, trusting their loved ones to these people, and then finding out about this lie on multiple fronts. What is it about this kind of fraud, hitting people right when they're grieving, that causes such deep, lasting psychological wounds?
That's such a critical question because the emotional trauma here, it's immense. It's uniquely complex. It's not like a typical scam where it's just about money. This hits at the core of trust, right? It messes with the grieving process itself.
Yeah.
And the stories from the families, they're just heartbreaking. They really show you the impact. Take Tanya Wilson. She truly believed she'd spread her mother's ashes in Hawaii. A beautiful, personal, final act.
Okay.
Then she finds out the truth. The ashes she spread, they weren't her mother's at all. She described the feeling, and this is her quote, "I honestly feel like I have whiplash, and I can't hold on to one emotion long enough to be able to process it."
Oh, wow. That just,
Yeah.
it captures that complete disorientation, doesn't it? Having that memory, that final act, just ripped away and shown to be false. It's like being traumatized all over again.
Exactly. It's not just loss, it's the fabrication of a final moment. And then there's Angelica Stedman. She received a container, but instead of her daughter Chanel's ashes, it was filled with concrete.
Concrete.
Concrete. Her words. Just as piercing. She said it felt like a knife being stabbed in my heart and twisted. Imagine holding that urn, knowing it's a symbol of pure deceit. It's a constant physical reminder of the lie.
That's horrific.
And Heather DeWolf, she couldn't even locate her son's axe remains. She said, I trusted them, responsible for my son's physical presence for his last moments on this earth. We all trusted them. And these impacts, they go on for years. Colton Sperry, his grandmother's body was found after 4 agonizing years.
4 years.
Yeah. He's dealt with depression, needed therapy, even got an emotional support dog. It just shows this isn't typical grief. It's this profound, complex trauma. Families talk about nightmares, crushing guilt, wondering what their loved one went through, even deep concerns about their souls, their final peace. The emotional weight is just immeasurable.
The fallout from such a deep breach of trust is just devastating. And for these families, accountability has to be the first step towards any kind of closure, right? Thankfully, justice for Jon Hallford has started to happen pretty recently, and the severity seems to reflect the gravity of what he did.
It certainly does seem that way. On June 27, 2025, just recently, Jon Hallford got 20 years in federal prison. That was for conspiracy to commit wire fraud.
Okay, wire fraud.
Yeah.
That's using emails, phones, bank transfers to defraud people.
Exactly. It's a serious federal crime. And that 20-year sentence, that was the maximum possible for those charges. So it sends a really strong message.
Right.
He had also previously pleaded guilty in state court to 191 counts of corpse abuse. That sentencing is still coming up, scheduled for August 2025.
191 counts.
Yeah.
One for each body found.
Precisely. And Judge Nina Wang, in the federal case, she really highlighted how unique this was. She said, quote, "This is not an ordinary fraud case," which I think speaks volumes about the horror involved.
Definitely not ordinary. Did he say anything?
He did apologize in court, said something like, "I am so deeply sorry for my actions. I still hate myself for what I've done. But, you know, for the families who endured so much betrayal," that apology was met with a lot of skepticism, understandably. Hard to see how words could fix that level of harm.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's not just him, is it? His wife is involved too.
That's right. The case is still unfolding. His wife, Carie Hallford, she's facing her own trial in September 2025. Similar charges, federal and state, including those same 191 counts of corpse abuse.
Wow.
So it just underlines how complex this all is and that the legal process is still very much ongoing for these families. They're still kind of stuck in it.
Right. More waiting, more uncertainty.
Absolutely. And there was another legal development. The families were awarded a massive judgment against the Hallfords, $950 million.
$950 million.
Yeah. Now, realistically, it's probably uncollectible given their finances, but it's a hugely powerful symbolic statement from the court acknowledging the sheer scale of the damage.
So it's more about the message than the money.
Pretty much. The attorney for some victims, Andrew Swan, he commented on it, hoped the judgment sends an unmistakable message to the industry. Bad behavior has significant consequences. It's about setting a precedent, raising awareness, even if the families don't see that money.
That's a huge statement, even symbolically. And it leads us to the wider picture, doesn't it? Because this return to nature case, as awful as it is, it feels like it's pointing to bigger problems. This isn't just one bad apple, is it? It highlights some really troubling weak spots in the funeral industry itself.
That's a really critical point. This isn't an anomaly, sadly. The data backs that up. In just 1 year, 2019, funeral homeowners across the U.S. swindled clients out of at least $4 million.
$4 million?
Yeah. Mostly through mishandling what are called pre-need funds. You know, when people pay in advance for their own funerals, sometimes years ahead.
Right, to lock in prices or just be prepared.
Exactly. But those funds are supposed to be held in trust. That long gap between payment and service, it makes it ripe for abuse if there isn't tight regulation. Common scams involve taking that money and just never providing the services, or even people impersonating staff to squeeze more money out of grieving families.
That's predatory.
It is. And the return to nature case specifically, it just blew massive holes in the idea of proper oversight. Think about it. The facility kept operating unregistered after its license expired back in November 2022.
Wait, it was operating without a license. For how long?
For months, possibly longer. It shows a huge regulatory blind spot. There wasn't an effective system in place to automatically flag and shut down a business operating illegally like that. It just allowed this horror to go on, completely unchecked.
Yeah. So if we look at that bigger picture, what actually needs to change? What can be done to stop this kind of awful exploitation from happening again? It sounds like just reacting isn't enough.
You're absolutely right. We need real comprehensive reform here. Much stricter regulations are needed everywhere. Things like enhanced licensing rules, making sure they're regularly renewed and rigorously checked, not just rubber stamped.
Okay.
We also need more frequent, unannounced inspections. Not just checking paperwork, but actually looking at the facilities, making sure they're up to standard.
Makes sense.
And maybe most importantly, we need much better consumer education. Families are vulnerable, right? They need to be armed with information. What questions should I ask? What documents do I need to see? What are the red flags I should look out for?
Empowering people during that difficult time.
Exactly. Now, things like the FTC's funeral rule that helps with price transparency and maybe undercover checks, those are steps. But clearly, we need stronger proactive measures to really protect families from this kind of devastating betrayal.
Yeah.
It's about rebuilding trust where it's been so completely shattered.
Yeah. The return to nature case.
Yeah.
It really is just a tragic story of trust being utterly destroyed. It's left these lasting scars on hundreds of families, and it's exposed these huge weaknesses in the system. This deep dive, it wasn't just about a shocking story, was it? It was about really trying to grasp the layers of deceit, the immense human cost, and why we urgently need to rethink the safeguards in an industry with such a profound responsibility.
It certainly is. And it leaves us with a pretty sobering question, I think, for all of us, really. Given how incredibly vulnerable people are, emotionally and financially, when they're grieving, how do we, as a society, make absolutely sure that those final acts of care for our loved ones are always, always handled with dignity and integrity? And what role do we, as consumers, have to play in demanding better oversight, better transparency from the people we entrust with so much?